She found a rusted key in her father's toolbox. It opened a shop her family forgot existed, and inside that forgotten place, she learned the story of her life. The one she'd always been told was a lie. The day I turned 18 was the day I became officially homeless. That's not the language they use, of course. They say aging out. They say transition, independence. They hand you a cardboard box stuffed with your files, a final check worth a few $100s that's supposed to carry you until employment appears, and a handshake that feels less like a farewell and more like a push off a ledge. For 2 years, 16 to 18, the state had been my legal guardian, and on the morning of my birthday, it terminated me. I stood on the porch of the Northgate Group home, the same porch where I'd arrived, a terrified 16-year-old gripping a backpack that held everything I owned. Now I was a terrified 18-year-old gripping a cardboard box. The only difference was that this time no one waited for me on the other side of that door. The air bit, a sharp, soaking cold that promised a brutal November. It crawled through my thin jacket, the one pulled from the donation closet. Too wide in the shoulders, too short at the wrists, a perfect metaphor for my entire life in care. Nothing ever fit right. If you're watching this and you know what it feels like to stand at that kind of crossroads, the past sealed behind you, nothing but fog stretching ahead, then you're exactly where you belong. Hit subscribe because we tell stories for people who had to build their own road home. My social worker, Mr. Henderson, sat waiting in his beige sedan, engine humming with quiet impatience. He was a good man, I think. As good as anyone can be when their job is managing the wreckage of shattered lives on a government salary. He had exhausted eyes and a permanent furrow between his brows, like a man forever working an equation with too many unknowns. I was one of those unknowns. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 0, underscore, underscore. His voice was gentle. I wasn't ready. I nodded anyway. I slid into the passenger seat and settled the box on my lap like a cardboard shield. The car smelled of cold coffee and bureaucracy, the official fragrance of my teenage years. We drove without speaking. Wipers swept a steady rhythm against the drizzle. Our destination was a tiny, state-subsidized apartment. 1 room, a kitchenette, mine for exactly 3 months. After that, I belonged to no one and nothing. It was supposed to be a starting line. It felt like the edge of a cliff. There's one more thing, Mr. Henderson said, shattering the quiet. He reached into the back seat and lifted a dusty red metal toolbox. Old, dented. Its surface mapped with scratches, like scars on skin. This was your father's. My breath stopped. My father? That name was a ghost I carried, but never spoke aloud. He died just over 2 years ago. Construction accident. They called it sudden. His death was the thing that sent me spinning into the system. One more piece of administrative wreckage. I had no other family. No aunts, no grandparents. No one. Just a fading photograph and a story I'd assembled from whispered half-truths and blacked-out files. He was a good man, but troubled. Couldn't hold a job. Drank too much. Left me with nothing. That was the official narrative, the one they handed me like a fact. I took the toolbox from Mr. Henderson, heavier than I expected. Is this it? My voice came out small. This is everything? He gave me a look, sad, apologetic, final. His landlord kept it in storage. It's all that remained. The rest of his belongings were thrown away. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 5, underscore, underscore. I just nodded, turning that cold metal box in my hands. It felt like an ending. This was what a man's entire life amounted to: a box of tools, my inheritance. He dropped me at the apartment building, a grim concrete slab on the industrial edge of town. He helped carry my things to the third floor. The room was small, spotless, and devastatingly empty. It reeked of fresh, cheap paint. "I'll check in with you in a few days," he said from the doorway. "There's a matter regarding his property we need to settle, just a formality." I didn't understand what he meant, but exhaustion swallowed the question before I could ask it. I thanked him. Then he was gone. The door latched shut, and silence filled that room like a physical weight. It was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I was 18, I was free, and I was completely, devastatingly alone. I left the toolbox by the door. I couldn't bring myself to open it. It stood there like a tombstone for every promise never kept. Rust-red steel, a monument to the man who gave me nothing but empty space where a father should have been. 3 days passed, and I did absolutely nothing. Sat on that paper-thin mattress, watching rain slide down glass. Ate saltines, drank tap water. The future stretched out like a grey sea with no shore in sight, and I had no oar, no sail, no direction. The numbness kept me safe. Then day 4 arrived, and something cracked open. A stubborn little flame of curiosity caught inside the hollow cavity my chest had become. That box. I needed to know what was inside. I dragged the toolbox to the center of the room, flipped the 2 metal latches. They popped with a crisp, decisive snap. The top tray held exactly what you'd picture: screwdrivers with worn wooden grips, a heavy hammer, claw chipped at the edge, pliers, wrenches, a mess of mismatched sockets clattering in cracked plastic. They carried the scent of oil and iron, and something deeper, something that reached into me. Sawdust. My father smelled like sawdust. I lifted the tray free, and there, settled at the very bottom like it had been waiting, was a single object. Not a tool, a key. Long, forged from dark iron, heavy enough to feel like it meant something. The head was shaped like an ornate clover. The bit was complex, toothed, deliberate. Rust clung to it in patches, deep blood orange that crumbled against my fingertips. This wasn't a house key, not a car key, not anything modern. This was the kind of key you see in fairy tales, the kind that unlocks things people forgot existed. Tucked beside it, a small piece of paper, yellowed with age, folded into a tight square. My fingers shook as I opened it. Written in neat, compact handwriting I half recognized as my father's, was an address. Not an address I knew. Part of the city I'd never even heard of. Just a street name and a number. Nothing else. No explanation. No message. Just a key and a location. A question mark left behind by a dead man. I sat on that floor with cold iron pressing into my palm and that scrap of paper lying beside me. For the first time in 2 years, the numbness started pulling back like a tide going out. What replaced it had no name. Hope laced with terror. The key was a loose thread dangling from the story I'd always been told about my life. And I knew, felt it settle into my bones like concrete setting, I had to pull it. I had to find the door this key belonged to. The phone screamed the next morning, shrill, jarring, bouncing off bare walls. Mr. Henderson. His voice had shed the gentle sympathy from before. Pure bureaucratic machinery now. "Maya, good morning. Calling about your father's estate, as I mentioned. Time to settle it." I sat up. Heart picking up speed. His estate? I thought the toolbox was everything. "Legally speaking, no," he said. "There's a property, commercial storefront, registered under his name, Old North Quarter. Problem is, the city has it flagged as derelict. He was years behind on property taxes. There's a substantial lien attached. Papers shuffled on his end. Here's the situation. The city will forgive a portion of back taxes if the property sells to a designated developer handling revitalization in that area. They've submitted an offer. After liens and fees clear out, you'd walk away with roughly $5,000. Clean break. $5,000 might as well have been a fortune. A ticket to somewhere else. Some fresh beginning. The smart play. The easy play. What if I don't want to sell? The question left my mouth before my brain approved it. Silence stretched across the line. Maya, he said, voice softening back to that tired father register. I've reviewed the file. The building is a shell, unoccupied for years. Inspection report says the roof is failing. Water damage throughout. It's a money pit, a liability. Taking the cash is the sensible move. It's what anyone would advise. What anyone would advise. Those words hung in the air like smoke. The system had been advising me my entire life, advising me to stay quiet, stay compliant, don't make waves, accept whatever story they handed me. But now I had a key in my pocket, heavy iron that contradicted every piece of advice they'd ever given. What's the address? I asked, voice steady as a flat line. He sighed, long, exhausted, the sound of a man who'd watched too many people make choices he couldn't protect them from. Maya, there's no point going out there. It's boarded up. The address, Mr. Henderson, I said again, and there was something new in my voice. Something that had never been there before. He gave me the address. It was the same one. The exact same address scrawled on that yellowed scrap of paper from the toolbox. A current shot through my body. Not painful, but electric. Undeniable. This wasn't coincidence. This was a thread pulling me forward. I told him. He began. I didn't let him finish. It's my property. I have the legal right to see it. Silence on the line. I trapped him inside his own framework, his own bureaucratic logic. He said slowly, dragging the word like it weighed something. After I hung up, I stood in the center of that bare room with my thoughts spinning. The easy money, the clean break. It sang to me like something sweet and dangerous, pulling me toward a shore where nothing would ever hurt again. Sign the papers, cash the check, vanish. Put the past in a sealed container, same as my father's tools, and let it rot. But what if the past refused to stay buried? What if it was down there, waiting? Not dead, but patient. I pulled out my thin fold of state-issued cash. Money meant for groceries and bus fare to interviews I hadn't scheduled yet. I counted every bill. It wasn't much. I looked up the address on the cheap smartphone they'd given me. 2 hours by bus. A trip across the entire city to a neighborhood that barely registered on the map. A grid of streets that looked like something the world had decided to forget. The decision felt like standing at the edge of a high board. I could climb back down, return to solid ground, the $5,000, the responsible choice. Or I could jump. Throw myself into water I couldn't see the bottom of, with no way of knowing what waited below. I pulled on my oversized jacket, dropped the iron key into my pocket where it pressed against my thigh, heavy, undeniable, real, and walked out the door. The bus ride peeled back the city in layers. First, the grim utility of my neighborhood, then the polished glass towers downtown, catching what little light the sky offered. Then the sprawling suburbs with their trimmed hedges and quiet sidewalks. And then the other side. The city started to unravel. Buildings grew older, streets narrowed. Chain stores and branded coffee shops disappeared, replaced by small, independent places with sun-bleached awnings and prices written by hand on cardboard. It felt like moving backward through decades. The bus shuddered to a halt at a corner marked by a rusted signpost. "North Quarter," the driver announced. He didn't look at me. I was the only passenger to stand. I stepped onto fractured pavement, and the bus pulled away with a pneumatic gasp, abandoning me to a silence so deep it felt physical. Only the wind moved, whispering through it. The sky hung low and colourless overhead. The air smelled damp, mineral, like stone that never sees sunlight. The street was lined with 2- and 3-story brick buildings, their faces worn smooth by 100 years of weather and indifference. Some were boarded shut, windows like hollow sockets staring at nothing. Others clung to life, a barber shop with a pole that had stopped spinning, a tiny grocery, its window display thick with dusty cans, a laundromat that hummed to itself like it had forgotten anyone was listening. And there, squeezed between the laundromat and a structure wrapped in peeling plywood, was the address. Narrower than its neighbours, the brick darker, stained almost black with decades of soot. The ground floor display window had gone opaque under layers of grime so thick it looked intentional. Green paint on the door and frames had blistered away in patches, exposing the grey skeleton of wood beneath. A sign hung crooked above the entrance. I squinted. The ghost of a single word remained. Underscore underscore, quote underscore, 26 underscore underscore. It looked exactly like Mr. Henderson said it would. Derelict, hollowed out. A mistake someone left behind. My chest tightened. Maybe he was right. Maybe this whole trip was foolishness dressed up as courage. I nearly turned around. I could walk back to that bus stop, ride back to my empty room, dial Henderson's number, take the 5,000, be sensible. But my hand was already in my pocket, my fingers already curled around the cold iron weight of that key. I'd come this far. I had to know. I climbed the single stone step to the front door. A heavy black iron lock was set into the wood just below the handle. Old as the key itself, rusted the same shade of brown. My hand shook as I raised the key, teeth aligning with the intricate shape of the keyhole. It slid in. For one breath, nothing. I waited for it to jam, for this to be where the story ended, where hope hit a wall. Then I turned it. A horrible grinding screech, metal dragging against metal. A sound like ripping through a century of stillness. Then a heavy, resonant thunk, the bolt sliding back into the doorframe. It worked. The key actually worked. I stepped backward. My heart slammed against my ribs. The door was unlocked. The story wasn't finished. It was only now beginning. My hand hovered over the old brass knob, cold to the touch. The metal polished smooth by 1,000 palms pressing it open over the years. What was I doing here? Trespassing in some abandoned building? But it's not trespassing when you hold the key. And this wasn't some random structure. It was mine. A strange possessiveness surged through me, fierce and fragile at the same time. This was the only thing on earth that belonged to me. I drew a long breath, damp air flooding my lungs, and pushed the door forward. It groaned against the floor, the bottom edge grinding on stone. But it gave way. It opened into darkness. Not total blackness, a deep, powdery twilight. One razor-thin beam of sunlight cut through the gloom from a gap in the boarded windows. It lit up a spinning universe of dust particles, like walking into a photograph someone had sealed away decades ago. The air hung motionless and heavy, carrying a scent I couldn't name right away. Old wood. Yes. Dry dust, of course. But beneath those, something else lived. A faint metallic bite, like a machine shop. A rich earthiness like aged leather. A sharp, clean edge like oil and solvent. The smell of labor, of making things. I crossed the threshold and let the heavy door drift closed behind me with a muffled thud. Darkness swallowed the room again until my eyes began to adjust. Shapes emerged from shadow, slowly, one by one. A long, narrow space. The front half, a shop. A counter stretched along one wall. Behind it, shelves climbed all the way to a high, pressed tin ceiling. Every surface, every shape was shrouded in white cotton dust cloths. The room looked haunted, lumpy figures standing silent beneath their coverings, waiting. I moved deeper in. My footsteps obscenely loud against wide plank floors. I reached for one of the cloths, heavy, stiff with years of accumulated grit. I pinched a corner between my fingers and pulled. The fabric tore free with a whisper, loosing a fresh eruption of dust that hit my throat and made me sneeze. Underneath, a glass display case. Inside, resting on faded velvet trays, were watches. Not cheap digital things, old mechanical pieces. Pocket watches in ornate engraved silver housings. Wristwatches on cracked leather bands. Their faces, tiny galaxies of intricate gears and miniature dials. Every single one frozen at a different hour. I reached for another cloth on the shelving and dragged it down. More watches, clocks, strange, beautiful objects I had no names for. Music boxes with inlaid wood lids, ornate brass barometers, a ship's chronometer mounted in a gimbaled wooden case, a treasure trove of forgotten craftsmanship, things built by hand with inhuman patience. This was not merely a shop. It was a museum of precision, a temple dedicated to the work of careful hands. The back half of the room was the workshop. A massive wooden workbench sat beneath the largest window, its glass so layered in filth it barely admitted a sliver of grey light. Tools hung in perfect rows on the pegboard above, tiny screwdrivers with colour-coded handles, brass hammers, files in every conceivable shape, dozens of tweezers and pliers, each more delicate than the one beside it. On the bench itself, the work was arranged as if the craftsman had stepped out for coffee 5 minutes ago. A half-disassembled pocket watch rested on a small leather mat, its impossibly small screws lined up in a precise row. A jeweller's magnifying loupe sat beside it, lens aimed at the ceiling. Wonder and unease moved through me in equal measure. Who was this person? Who had worked in this room? My father. The thought arrived as a whisper, but it didn't match. The man I'd been told about, the drinker, the drifter, the man who couldn't hold down work, could not be the same person who built this space. Everything here spoke of order, patience, extraordinary skill. This was the workshop of a master craftsman. I dragged my fingertips along the workbench edge, wood-worn glass smoothed by oil and decades of use. This was his space. He had stood exactly where I stood. His hands had gripped these same tools. A wave of dizziness hit me so hard I had to clutch the bench to stay upright. It was too much. The story I'd carried my whole life was fracturing, coming apart at every seam. I needed to sit. There was a wooden stool tucked beneath the bench, and I dragged it out. As I did, my knuckles caught something. A small metal handle hidden under the overhanging lip of the workbench. A drawer, so perfectly flush with the wood that its seams had vanished into the grain. I pulled. It glided open without a sound. No tools inside. Paper. notebooks crammed with that same tight, precise handwriting from the scrap. And resting in the center of it all, a grey metal lockbox, shoebox-sized. No lock on it. I lifted the lid. My lungs forgot how to work. A thick bundle of envelopes, dozens deep, bound together with a length of old twine. On the top envelope, written in that same careful script, my name, Maya. Beneath the letters sat a small portable cassette player, the kind everyone had 20 years back. One tape already loaded inside. The label, handwritten, bore a single word. Quote 27. I lowered myself onto the stool, the box balanced on my knees. The shop's silence wrapped itself around me like a held breath. Dust motes floated through the single shaft of light. Every step had been building to this. The key, the door, the shop, this box, these letters, this tape. I was sitting at the center of it all. The answers were literally in my hands, and I was paralyzed. What if the truth turned out worse than the story I already knew? What if it confirmed everything? That he left me, that he hadn't cared? But what if it didn't? What if it shattered the whole narrative I'd built my life around? I looked at the silent workshop surrounding me. These walls knew. These tools knew. It was time I knew too. I pulled the twine loose. Before I tell you what those letters contained, I need to stop for a moment. If this story is landing somewhere real for you, if you've ever felt like you were peeling back a hidden layer of your own history, a truth someone buried on purpose, tell me in the comments. This community is for people who understand that the past never stays buried. You are not alone in this. All right, back to it. I sat on that dusty stool with the stack of letters in my lap, and I could not breathe. My hands trembled so violently I could barely grip the first envelope. Every single one was addressed to me. In my father's handwriting. They were dated. The first, almost 2 years old, written just weeks after he died, or weeks after I was told he died. I had a choice, the letters or the tape, the written word or the spoken one. I chose the tape. I needed his voice. I needed that raw, immediate connection before I could face ink on paper. My fingers stumbled across the buttons of the cheap plastic player. Play, eject, fast forward, rewind, stop. I pressed play. A second of nothing, just the soft hiss of magnetic tape unwinding. Then a voice. Maya. Hesitant. Rough. So saturated with love and pain that it hit me like something physical. His voice. I remembered it from when I was very small. That low, steady rumble that used to make the world feel safe. Hearing it now felt like electricity passing through my chest. __, quote _ 28 __. A sob rose in my throat, hot, sharp. Impossible to swallow. I pressed my palm against my mouth to hold it in. The voice continued. A shaky breath on the tape, the creak of a chair, a faint echo off close walls. He was here. He recorded this in this very room. My eyes were closed. Tears ran freely down my face, falling onto the dusty floor below. The story I had carried for years, that crushing, suffocating weight of being unwanted, of being discarded, was fracturing, splitting apart. It wasn't abandonment, it was protection. A desperate, brutal act of love. This shop, his voice continued, gentler now. This was my refuge, my secret place. They never knew it existed. I came here after dark. I worked. I repaired pieces for collectors, dealers, people who paid in cash and never asked where things came from. every cent I saved. Some went toward paying them down, piece by piece. The rest is yours." He cleared his throat, his voice thick and unsteady. "I'm close, Maya. So close to being finished, to clearing the whole debt. And then I was coming for you. We were going to begin again, right here in this shop. I was going to teach you everything. Your hands. You have your mother's hands. Steady. You'd take to it like breathing." The tape hissed for several seconds. "I suppose I ran out of time," he whispered. Barely audible now. They must have discovered I was nearly free. Or maybe they just lost patience. I don't know. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is you. What you choose next. Another pause. "There's a decision waiting for you. In the floor, beneath the workbench, there's a loose board, third from the wall. Underneath, you'll find everything I managed to put aside. It's no fortune, but it's a beginning. Enough to cover the back taxes and get the power running. Or enough to buy you a bus ticket to wherever you want to be. You can take it, sell this place, walk away and never look back. Start clean. Nobody, least of all me, would hold that against you. That's the easy road," he sighed. "Then there's the other road, the harder one. You can stay. You can make this place yours. You can learn what I never got the chance to teach you. The knowledge is all here, in the notebooks, in the work itself. This place isn't just a building, Maya. It's a legacy. It's a home. If you'll have it." The tape player clicked. The hiss died. The message was finished. The silence that flooded back was different now. Not hollow, not empty. It was full. Full of his voice, his devotion, his sacrifice. I sat there a long time, letting the truth settle over me like sediment through water. My entire world had been rewritten by a 10-minute cassette tape. My father wasn't a villain. He was a hero. Flawed, desperate, tragic. A man who had surrendered everything for me. I finally turned to the letters. Opened the first one, dated just after I'd been taken into care. "My dearest Maya," it began. "Today they took you. I watched from a block away, hidden in an alley. You were so small, so brave. You didn't even cry. I did. I cried enough for both of us. I read for hours, letter after letter, a secret history of 2 years of my life unfurled before me. He wrote about his nights in the shop, the intricate watches passing through his hands, the slow, grinding process of paying down what he owed. He wrote about me. He'd followed me from a distance. He knew I'd been moved from a foster home to the group home. He wrote, "I saw you in the park yesterday. You were reading a book. Your hair is longer." It was a chronicle of a hidden life, a father's love persisting in shadow. He documented every dollar earned, every dollar paid toward the debt, every dollar saved for me. The last letter was different. The handwriting, rushed, unsteady. Underscore, underscore, quote underscore, 42 underscore underscore. The letter slipped from my numb fingers. It wasn't a construction accident. He was murdered. He knew death was coming, and his final thoughts were of me, of making sure I found my way here. The grief struck like a physical force, a tidal wave that drove the air from my lungs. I doubled over, pressing the letters against my chest, and I wept. I cried for the father I never got to know, for the years stolen from us, for his sacrifice, the terrible, beautiful weight of his love. And when the tears finally drained away, something new surfaced, something hardening in my chest like cooling steel. Rage. And beneath the rage, determination. He had left me a choice. The easy road or the hard one? Run or stay and fight? I looked down at my hands. My mother's hands, he'd said. Steady. I dropped to my knees, tears falling onto the dusty floorboards, and began searching for the loose board. The planks were wide and dark with age, worn smooth along the pathways between the door, the counter, and the workbench. My fingers traced the rough grain of each plank, searching for that subtle difference. Third from the wall, that's what he'd written. I counted. 1, 2, 3. It looked identical to every other board in that floor, but when I pressed the edge, it shifted. No nail held it down. I wedged my fingernails into the gap and pulled. The plank came up with a low moan, exposing a dark cavity underneath. Cool, dry air drifted up from the hollow. I reached into the blackness. My fingers found something wrapped in oilcloth, heavy, rectangular. I pulled it free and unwrapped it on the floor. 2 items inside. The first, a thick manila envelope stuffed with documents. A deed to the property in his name, free and clear. The original bill of sale from 40 years ago, bearing my grandfather's signature. My family had owned this place for 2 generations. Not just my father's shop, my inheritance, a legacy threaded back through decades. Alongside the deed sat the title to a small, beat-up pickup truck stored in a rented garage a few blocks away, paid up for 6 more months. The second item was a plain metal cash box, heavy in my hands. I flipped the latch. My breath stopped. Neat stacks of 20s, 50s, 100s, bound tight with rubber bands. Not a fortune, but more money than I had ever seen gathered in one place. His life's work compressed into paper and ink. Countless solitary nights hunched over this bench, converted into something I could hold. A note rested on top. His last words to me. __, quote _ 43 __. I sank back on my heels, cashbox in my lap, deed in my hand, the choice made tangible. Right here was the easy road. Take this money, go to Mr. Henderson, sign the sale papers for the building, add that 5,000 to this stash, disappear. I could go to college, travel, buy a small apartment somewhere quiet and anonymous, erase the last 18 years and start fresh as someone without a history. The thought pulled at me like a warm blanket on a freezing night. The sheer relief of surrender, of not having to fight, of accepting the simple offered path. Who wouldn't want that? I thought about the group home, the cold bureaucracy, the feeling of being a number in someone's file, the pitying looks, the constant quiet judgment. I could leave all of it behind forever. The anger and grief from earlier had drained into a vast, hollow emptiness. Exhaustion settled through me, bone deep, ancient. Maybe running was the right answer. Maybe fighting belonged to other people, people who hadn't already lost everything. I set the money and the deed on the workbench beside the half-finished watch. That tiny, intricate mechanism, gears and springs frozen mid-motion. A complex machine waiting for a skilled hand to wake it. I looked at the tools on the wall, each in its designated place. The notebooks filled with my father's steady handwriting. Diagrams, calculations for escapements and balance wheels. This was his world, the world he'd wanted to hand me. Could I turn my back on it? Could I sell it to a developer who'd tear it down and raise something sterile in its place? Could I let his story, his real story, be paved over and forgotten? My phone buzzed in my pocket. I flinched. The sound was an intrusion, a violation of the sacred quiet in this room. I pulled it out. Unknown number on the screen. I almost let it ring through, but something made my thumb find the green button. __, quote 44, ___. A man's voice, slick, confident, the kind of voice accustomed to hearing yes. Yes, I said. My own voice came out as a hoarse whisper. This is Tom Abernathy from Sterling Development. Your social worker passed along your number. We're the firm interested in the property on North Elm Street. Just wanted to reach out personally. I said nothing. Sterling Development. Even the name felt cold. Metallic. Listen, kid, he said, his tone shifting, turning conspiratorial, like we were old friends. I know the city's offer on the table. It's a formality. We can make this happen fast. Cash in your pocket by Friday, a clean slate. You don't want some crumbling ruin in a neighborhood like this dragging you under. It's dead weight. We're throwing you a lifeline. Dead weight. He called my father's life's work dead weight. The hollow pit in my chest disappeared. Something hot and fierce rose up in its place, a protective rage I didn't know I had. This man with his polished tone and his easy cash wanted to purchase my father's sacrifice, wanted to grind it into profit. He wanted to pave over my history. I was there that night, an old man from the block had told me once, his voice barely above a growl. Saw the whole damn thing. This wasn't part of any script, this memory, this voice, but it surfaced anyway. A flash of overheard conversation, a puzzle piece I hadn't known I was holding. The official story said he fell. The whispers said he was pushed. This developer, this company, were they connected? Was their revitalization project the reason my father became inconvenient? The easy wrong wasn't just signing over a building, it was letting them win, letting them walk away clean. Quote 51 I said. The word came out quiet, but it thundered inside me like nothing I'd ever spoken. Come again? Abernathy asked. Annoyance sharpened his voice. I said no, louder now. My voice rang with something I'd never heard in it before. Certainty. I said the we felt strange on my tongue, strange and powerful. It was me and my father, me and my grandfather, a lineage speaking through one voice. Quote 57 __. I hung up before he could get another word out. I stood there, heart slamming against my ribs, breath coming in short, jagged pulls. The fear remained, cold and knotted in my gut. But now it shared space with something else, something that felt like power, like purpose. I looked at the money on the bench. It wasn't a bus ticket anymore. It was a war chest. I looked at the deed, not a liability, a declaration of ownership. I picked up the phone again, scrolled through my contacts until I found the number, pressed call. Henderson, he answered, voice flat. Mr. Henderson, I said, it's Maya Lane. I've made a decision about the property. I drew a long breath, looking around the dusty, silent shop. My shop. I'm not selling, I said. I'm staying. A long, stunned silence stretched across the line. I could picture him at that cluttered desk of his, pinching the bridge of his nose, the crease between his brows cutting deeper. Maya, he finally said. His voice carried a weary kind of pity. We've been through this. The building is a wreck. The taxes alone would bury you. You have no experience, no capital. Staying isn't a plan, it's a fantasy. It's my father's legacy, I said. The words tasted of iron and conviction. And it's my home. It's a derelict property that will bleed you dry and then keep bleeding, he countered, frustration climbing into his tone. That developer's offer is a gift. It's your only realistic exit. Maybe I don't want an exit, I said softly. Maybe I want an entrance. Another pause, different from the first. This one was thoughtful. When he spoke again, the frustration had drained away. What replaced it sounded like grudging respect. Okay, he said. Okay, Maya. If you're serious about this, you can't do it alone. You'll need help, legal help. The deed needs to be officially transferred into your name. You'll need a payment plan with the city for back taxes, utilities turned on, inspections scheduled. It's a mountain of paperwork. Can you help me? I asked. I don't know who else to turn to. A sigh came through the receiver, long and drawn out. The sound of a man who knew he was about to shoulder more than his paycheck covered. My job is to see you transitioned into independent living, he said, almost talking to himself. This is certainly independent. All right, Maya, I'll make some calls. There's a pro bono legal aid service that works with youth aging out of the system. I'll see if they can take your case. But you need to understand, this will be hard. Harder than anything you've faced before. I know, I said. I'm ready. After I hung up, a wave of pure terror crashed over me. What had I just done? I'd turned down a fortune, what felt like a fortune to someone like me, and committed myself to something impossible. The weight of it hit me all at once. Dust everywhere, grime coating every surface, silence so thick it pressed against my eardrums. The sheer enormity of the rot. Mr. Henderson had been right. This was delusion dressed up as hope. I was a fool playing pretend. I collapsed onto the stool, buried my face in my palms. That defiant rush from my phone call drained out of me like heat from a body left in snow. Nothing remained but the cold residue of doubt. I was nobody. An orphan clutching a box of old tools, pockets stuffed with ghosts. What made me think I had any right to attempt this? Then my gaze drifted to the workbench, the half-assembled watch, the notebooks filled with my father's careful, unhurried handwriting. He had stared down criminals, worked in secrecy for years. All of it for this place, all of it for me. He never quit, never fled. He worked. I stood up. The first step was obvious. Clean. I found a broom in a closet near the back, bristles splayed and worn to nothing. I started at the rear wall and pushed forward. Dust lay inches deep in places, a soft grey shroud over everything. As I swept, the floor revealed its history. Oil stains dark as bruises, a galaxy of tiny scratches from dropped instruments. The faint ghost outline of a chair that had sat in one spot for decades. Every stroke of that broom was reclamation. I wasn't just sweeping a floor. I was peeling back years of abandonment, of silence. I was carving out space for something new. It consumed the entire day. Bag after bag filled with dust and debris. I found old rags, discovered a tap in the back that still, miraculously, ran water. Murky, but usable. I wrung out a rag and attacked the windows. When the first pane came clear, a rectangle of thin afternoon light fell across the workshop floor. First new light to touch this room in years. It felt holy. The labor was brutal and physical and deeply, profoundly satisfying. Every muscle screamed. My hands were raw and cracked, but for the first time in my entire life, I felt genuinely powerful. This wasn't the passive endurance of the group home. This was creation. Active, deliberate creation. Nobody was doing something to me. I was doing something. The weeks that followed blurred together in constant motion. True to his word, Mr. Henderson connected me with a lawyer, a young, sharp-eyed woman named Sarah, who specialized in exactly these kinds of tangled, impossible-looking cases. She met me at the shop, practical boots clicking against the freshly swept concrete, her gaze cataloguing everything. "He was a watchmaker?" she asked, leaning toward a display case. "I think so," I said, "among other things." She studied me, then the stacks of paperwork, the deed, the tax notices. "All right," she said, pushing up her sleeves. "Let's save your home." Days bled into phone calls and city offices. We negotiated with the tax assessor, hammered out a payment plan I could barely afford. The first installment devoured a massive portion of the cash my father had left behind. But when Sarah handed over that cashier's check, she turned to me with a smile. "Quote 84, quote," she said. "Quote 85, quote, first real victory." Then came the inspections. The building inspector was a stone-faced man who surveyed the peeling paint and water-stained ceiling with visible contempt. He moved through the space with a clipboard, each notation sounding like a sentence being handed down. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 86, underscore, underscore. I trailed behind him, heart dropping lower with every pronouncement. At the end, he turned to face me, expression impossible to read. "Quote 87, quote," he said. "Quote 88, quote, quote 89. Quote, my voice came out barely above a whisper. Quote 90. Quote, he held my gaze for a long moment, sharp, measuring. His eyes moved to the clean floor, the washed windows, the set of my jaw. He exhaled, clicked his pen, made a note. Quote 91, he said. Not meeting my eyes. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 92, underscore, underscore. Not a yes, not a no, a chance. The electrician and the roofer were their own mountain entirely. Their estimates were staggering, far beyond whatever cash remained. I sat at the workbench that night, staring at the numbers, and the reality of my situation crashed over me again. Money draining away, problems towering above anything I could handle alone. The fantasy was finished. I was going to fail, going to lose this place exactly the way Mr. Henderson predicted. I pressed my forehead against that cool, worn wood, my father's workbench, and for the first time since discovering this place, something inside me cracked. Sitting there in the darkness, despair rolled through me like a tide. Those numbers on the estimates read like a verdict. Too massive, too impossible. I'd been so foolish, so recklessly sure. I'd stared down the system, hung up on the developer, planted my flag. But flags don't fix foundations. You need money, you need skills, you need people. All three were slipping through my fingers. I thought about Leo, my father. Had this same crushing weight pressed down on him. The man had outmaneuvered loan sharks, worked in shadow, lived two lives at once. My problems, a leaking roof, ancient wiring, seemed laughable by comparison. Yet they felt every bit as impossible. I was seconds from quitting, packing a bag, walking away from all of it. Then a soft tapping came at the front window. I raised my head. Through the freshly cleaned glass, a silhouette stood against the streetlights. An old man leaning on a cane. I half recognized him, a regular from the laundromat next door. I cracked the door open. I said, the words oddly foreign on my tongue. The old man smiled, eyes crinkling, warm. He said, voice like gravel wrapped in kindness. He swept his cane toward the shop interior. He said, the air left my lungs. Arthur said, his gaze drifting somewhere distant. Arthur paused. His eyes settled back on me, steady and kind. I said, my voice came out thick, raw. He said, plain as anything. He aimed his cane down North Elm Street. He let that land. I couldn't speak. Something fragile and unnamed opened in my chest. Not quite hope, not yet. More like the space where hope might take root. "Why?" I managed. "Why would you help me?" Arthur's smile disappeared. What replaced it was gravity, pure and serious. He said. He turned and shuffled toward his laundromat, and I stood on the doorstep, listening to his words settle into the quiet street. Come morning, I did exactly what he told me. Stomach knotted with nerves, I pushed through the barber-shop door. Inside, just one man in a white coat, sweeping hair from the floor. I said. He glanced up. Recognition spread slow across his face, then a grin. I steadied myself with a breath. Then it all came pouring out. The impossible estimates. The 30-day deadline. Marco listened without interrupting, then reached for an old rotary phone and dialed. Rapid-fire Italian filled the shop, hands cutting the air for emphasis. He hung up and looked at me. Gianni showed up in a dented van, hand painted on the side. Loud, cheerful, smelling of garlic and solder. He moved through the shop whistling, tugging wires, scribbling notes. He announced with theatrical anguish. His quote still made me wince, but it was a third of the original estimate, and then he winked. She only same story with the roofer, Maria's cousin. He scaled the roof, came back down streaked with tar and filth, and quoted me a patch job that would hold a few years. Long enough for me to save for a full replacement. Your father, he said, dragging a rag across his knuckles. He repaired a music box for my little girl once. Wouldn't take a dime. Said it was a beautiful machine that deserved to sing again. Time we returned that kindness. Slowly, piece by piece, the impossible shrank into something manageable. A community I never knew existed began closing ranks around me. Gianni and his apprentices rewired the main service panel. Bright, steady, safe light flooding the workshop for the first time in years. The roofer sealed the leaks, halting the slow rot. Arthur started leaving a cup of coffee on my doorstep every morning. Maria from the grocery would appear with sandwiches, waving away my money like it offended her. I was still alone, but I wasn't lonely anymore. Days belonged to cleaning, nights belonged to studying. I devoured my father's notebooks, his real legacy. Not the money, not the building, the knowledge. He had documented everything, the delicate art of escapement repair, the complex mathematics of gear ratios, how to mix your own shellac, how to blue steel hands over an alcohol flame, a language I couldn't yet read, but I was hell-bent on learning. I started simple, a cheap broken clock from a thrift store, my father's diagrams spread beside me. I stripped it down, cleaned every gear, every spring, reassembled it. Nothing. Took it apart again, and again. Fifth attempt, hours deep in frustration. I nudged a tiny wheel into position with tweezers and heard it. Soft, almost imperceptible. Tick. Then again. Tick. It was alive. That sound was a symphony. I pressed the clock to my ear, tears of joy and exhaustion running down my face. I had fixed something, taken something broken and made it whole, found the right touch. The shop was transforming around me. No longer a dusty tomb, it was clean, bright, organized. I had carved out my own workspace on the big bench, my father's tools arranged beside mine. His presence still filled the room, but it wasn't a haunting anymore. It was comfort, quiet encouragement. I was building a new life, not on the ruins of my past, but on its foundation. The day the sign went up changed everything. Nothing fancy. I'd found an old plank in the back, and painted it myself, copying the lettering from one of my father's notebooks. It read simply, "Lane and daughter, clocks and watches, repairs." I hung it from the old bracket above the door, the same spot the original had occupied. As I tightened the last bolt, a small crowd materialized on the sidewalk. Arthur, beaming, Marco and Gianni on break from their own shops, Maria wiping her hands on her apron. They clapped. A small, quiet ovation. It meant the world. I had a name. I had a trade. I had a community. I unlocked the door and flipped the little cardboard sign in the window from closed to open. The brass bell above the door, polished just that morning, stayed silent. For hours I sat at the workbench, stomach in knots, pretending to oil a set of screwdrivers. What if nobody came? What if this whole thing was an expensive delusion? What if my father's gift hadn't passed down to me? Maybe I was just a girl playing dress-up in a dead man's workshop. Mid-afternoon, the bell jingled. My heart shot into my throat. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, clutching a small velvet pouch. She asked, tentative. I managed, barely above a squeak. I cleared my throat. She approached the counter slowly, as if unsure any of this was real. She said, I said softly. She looked at me with kind, watery eyes. She opened the pouch and tipped its contents onto the velvet mat. A beautiful, delicate lady's wristwatch, silver band, tiny diamonds marking the hours. But one of the hands had broken free. It rattled loose behind the crystal face. "This belonged to my mother," the woman said. Her voice cracked on that last word. "They told me no one could fix it, that the parts don't exist anymore." I reached for my loupe. My fingers shook as I pressed it to my eye. The world shrank to a magnified terrain of metal and glass. I studied the watch, the disconnected hand, the hairline post it had snapped from. A repair like this demanded micro-torch precision and a stillness I wasn't sure I possessed. I'd only ever read about this technique, buried deep in my father's most advanced notebooks. Fear crept in close. You'll destroy it. You're not skilled enough. You're not him. But then his voice rose up, the one from the cassette. You have your mother's hands. Steady. You'd be a natural. I lifted my gaze from the mechanism and met the woman's eyes, hope and terror swimming together in them. I drew one long breath. I told her. The words tasted honest. She came back a week later. 3 nights without sleep had passed between us. I'd failed twice, nearly liquefied the delicate hand with too much heat. But on the third attempt, guided by my father's notes and some instinct I couldn't name, I got it right. I set her watch on a velvet cushion. It was ticking, the second hand gliding in its perfect circle. She wept. "Thank you," she breathed, pressing cash into my palm, far more than my quote. "You gave me back a piece of my mother." That was the beginning. Word traveled through the neighborhood first, then the city. The ghost of North Elm Street had returned to life. People brought me their broken treasures. A grandfather clock silent since the moon landing. A music box holding someone's favorite lullaby. A ship's chronometer that once guided a family across an ocean. Every object arrived wrapped in a story, someone's history placed into my hands. I wasn't merely fixing machines. I was mending memory, stitching people back to their pasts. The shop grew into something beyond a business. It became a gathering place. Arthur dropped in for coffee and spun stories about the old neighborhood. Marco argued politics while I filed down a gear. Maria's children spread homework across a small corner table. My silent, solitary workshop had transformed into a living room. One afternoon, A polished black car slid to the curb outside. A man in an expensive suit stepped out. Not Tom Abernathy, but he carried that same sleek corporate energy. The bell jingled as he entered. His eyes swept the space, the clean walls, the ticking clocks, the customers waiting with patience. Quote 141 he asked. I nodded from my workbench, didn't stand. Sterling Development, he said. My colleague Mr. Abernathy is no longer with the company. We're still redeveloping the area. We've acquired most of the block. His gaze settled on me. Something flickered there. Annoyance and grudging respect. You're holding out. I'm not holding out, I said, lifting a tiny screwdriver. I'm staying put. He exhaled. Look, we'll make a new offer. A substantial one. Name your price. I set down my work, looked at him. Then past him, through the glass, at my sign. Lane and daughter. I thought about the key, the letters, the cassette tape, the broom handle worn smooth in my grip, the smell of solder, that first tick of a dead clock brought back to life. I thought about my father's sacrifice, my community's kindness. What number could hold all of that? This shop is not for sale, I said. My voice didn't waver. Quote 149 He watched me for a long moment, then gave one small nod, barely perceptible. Turned, walked out without another word. I had won, but it was never about beating him. It was about choosing. For myself, for my father, for this place. I'd taken the harder road, and it led me here. It led me home. My father left me a key, but the true gift was never the building, or the money, or even the tools. The true gift was the story those things unlocked. It taught me we are more than the narratives others write for us. It taught me that what looks like abandonment can be the most radical form of love. And it taught me that home isn't something you're given. It's a place you summon the nerve to construct with your own bare hands. The past isn't truly shattered. It's sitting there, patient, quiet, waiting for someone to find the right key, to grip it, to turn it, and to finally hear what it's been trying to say all along. So what's your key? What story sits locked inside you, pressing against the door? Tell me in the comments. Let's build something here. A gathering of people unafraid to turn that lock and face whatever waits on the other side. Thank you for being here. Subscribe, because every last one of us carries a story worth hearing, and every broken thing deserves its shot at being whole again.